Hi, this is January the 31st, 2021. This is the Democratic Alliance Weekly Labour Report. Thank you for coming online. And once again, I ask you to please post this on Facebook, send it to friends, send it on WhatsApp, do whatever's necessary to get the message out. Today, the end of January, I will talk to you about the failure of the Motor Vehicle Accident Fund and its future connection to the Compensation Fund, which in turn is also facing further destruction. There's still an ongoing nightmare in the Department of Labour. We've still got problems with the UIF, we've got problems with the CCMA. I have spoken about that, nothing's changed, these problems are ongoing, and unfortunately we're now going to see an absolute destruction of the Compensation Fund. I'm Michael Bagram, the Labour spokesperson of the Democratic Alliance, and I'm going to be looking at some of those issues that we see now in the almost destroyed Department of Employment and Labour. I don't think the Minister is actually thinking through any of these amendments that we're going to see, obviously in the Compensation Fund during the course of 2021. People will get an opportunity to speak to the Portfolio Committee, and I'll keep people informed about the Portfolio Committee meetings, and they're taking representations from people on the amendments suggested to the Compensation Fund. I do feel it is important, obviously at this point also, and everyone's watching it, to mention the Zondo Commission. This commission has actually outlined an absolute disaster that we're seeing in South Africa. The Zondo Commission is taking us beyond state capture. It's absolutely unbelievable. I feel that in mentioning the Zondo Commission, we need to start understanding that we're now beyond state capture. We're descending into some sort of pit, and unless this stops, South Africa will disappear completely. It's important that we've got the Zondo Commission because it is shedding some light on what has taken place, who's stealing, how's it going. We are seeing minister after minister, government ministers who have been involved in stealing, dipping their fingers into the till, and this is not just a couple of cents at a time, it's literally up to billions of rands are going missing. I mean, it's unbelievable to see that the very people that are supposed to be protecting us are just destroying the country in a wanton way. Very sad. Now, to go to the MVA, the Motor Vehicle Accident Fund, we know, and it's well known, that it's almost collapsed. It's almost bankrupt. Private institutions are taking judgments against them. They're not being able to pay for the accidents. It's become an absolute nightmare. So what does the Minister of Employment and Labour do? And what's he got to do with the Compensation Fund having a connection to the MVA? Well, quite simply, in his amendment to the Compensation Fund, he wants to deny the liability of individuals to claim for injuries on the way to or from work. In other words, if your employees on travelling to work get injured, at the moment they have a claim against the Compensation Fund. They're on their way to work and they got injured. And you could send them off to hospitals, private doctors, if they're willing to see your employees, and they can get help. The Minister wants to change all of that and say no. If they're injured on the way to work or on the way from work, they must claim from the Motor Vehicle Accident Fund if it took place in some sort of vehicle. Now we know, as I've just told you, the MVA, the fund itself, is bankrupt. So what they're doing is they're treating workers as if they're dirt. And if that goes through, and I suspect it will, it's being supported very strongly by the ANC, we've got real problems. The accidents that take place on their journey to work or away from work back home, you'll have no cover whatsoever. I don't know what the employment situation is going to do, how the employees are going to cover themselves. I don't know how our employers are going to try and protect their employees. I don't understand it. There's another issue, it's a bit of a technical issue, and that is, at the moment, private doctors can cede their claims against the Compensation Fund to institutions. So what they do is they treat the patients, and then they take the invoice that was supposed to go claim against the compensation fund, they give it to a third party who in turn claim it from the compensation fund, which means that the doctors do eventually get paid because the third parties then, if necessary, even take the fund to court. That becomes functional for doctors, hospitals, all service providers in the medical industry. The minister, obviously not being happy that the fund is being sued by these institutions to regain the money back to the doctors, the minister is now wanting to change that and say, no, you can't cede your claim to a third party, you must claim yourself. Now, they can't even get it together to pay the third parties who are claiming hundreds of claims at a time, so it should be easier to run. But no, they're saying the individuals must claim. Now, there's no ways that that's going to happen. In other words, we're not going to see any claims going through at all. I don't see how people are going to get any protection from the compensation fund for even injuries that take place at work. Already we know most of the service providers in the medical industry don't want to see compensation fund employees. Employers are now hard pressed to actually go and pay the doctors directly, pay the hospitals directly. In other words, that insurance doesn't work. It's an absolute nightmare, and it's going to get worse. I don't know how we're going to stop it, but we will, as the Democratic Alliance, try our utmost to stop this change. It's a nightmare, and we don't want it to get worse. There is one good issue, and that good issue is, and it's something that I, for one, but many others have been calling for since '94, to join the domestic workers to the compensation fund. It was an old apartheid piece of legislation that domestic workers couldn't claim from the compensation fund because they didn't exist as employees. So if you've had your domestic worker up until this day, many, many years later, over 2 decades of nagging the Department of Employment and Labour, they finally get forced to add domestic workers to the compensation fund. Now, this was not done through any goodwill of the government. The courts have now forced them to say you have to recognize domestic workers. It's an archaic concept that domestic workers were just left out. And despite the big words coming from our governing party, they never ever added domestic workers to the compensation fund. Now the courts, our judges, have forced them to do so, and they will be hopefully joined when the amendments come through. So that is actually very good news, and hopefully it comes through as soon as possible. We will definitely be supporting such an amendment. We need to know that there's enormous money in the compensation fund, and that money has to be used properly. And unfortunately, they're having difficulty even getting together to pay out anyone. We also know at the moment that the unemployment is still rising. There's still problems. We're going to have a year, 2021, of lots of retrenchments, as we spoke about last week. But we do need to protect the workforce as they are at the moment. They need cover, they need insurance. They need to be able to claim if they ever get injured at work. And what the ministry is now doing is they're trying to destroy it. The Democratic Alliance has got its act together in terms of opposing all of this, and we will be fighting it tooth and nail. So please watch this space, and thank you for listening to me today, the 31st of January.